What happens when a powerful Black entrepreneur sits face to face with a talk show host known for tearing guests apart on live television? She doesn't just survive, she rewrites the conversation. This is the story of Danielle Rivers, a woman who turned a televised ambush into a national moment of truth. Her words silenced a studio and sparked a movement. Danielle Rivers stood at the window of her modest but elegant office in Atlanta, staring out at the city she had grown up in, the city where she had fought tooth and nail to rise above expectations. At just 32, Danielle had gone from selling handmade bracelets at pop-up booths to becoming the founder of Roots and Rise, a multi-million-dollar fashion brand centered on sustainability and economic equity. But her proudest work wasn't what brought her profit, it was what brought others hope. The Elevate Her initiative was her latest project, a mentorship and grant program for young Black women entering entrepreneurship. It was bold, unapologetic, and already changing lives. Then the invitation came. An email from The Morning Table, one of the nation's most watched talk shows, popped up with an unmistakable subject line. Feature segment invitation, Danielle Rivers. The host, Meredith Cole, a sharp-tongued, icy-eyed anchor known for her hard truths and viral clashes. Danielle didn't flinch. She had stared down boardroom bullies and dismissive investors before. This would be no different. It's a risk, her assistant warned. Danielle smiled faintly. So was everything I've ever done. What she didn't know was this would be the moment that changed everything, not just for her, but for an entire generation. The Morning Table studio in Los Angeles buzzed with polished chaos. Cameramen adjusting angles, makeup artists dabbing foundation, and producers whispering into headsets. Danielle Rivers stepped into the backstage area wearing a deep emerald suit, a color that radiated quiet strength. Her locks were pinned up, her posture graceful but powerful. She exuded presence. "You look radiant," one stylist whispered. Danielle simply nodded, her mind already rehearsing the talking points that truly mattered. Equity, empowerment, and the futures of the young women she had committed to uplift. From behind the curtain, she heard the studio host's signature voice echo across the set. "She's been called a disruptor, a dreamer, and a builder. Please welcome Danielle Rivers." Polite applause followed, but the tone was uncertain, laced with curiosity and underlying skepticism. Meredith Cole sat poised in a cobalt blue blazer, her famous smirk intact, eyes gleaming with anticipation. As Danielle sat, Meredith leaned in with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "A self-made woman building bridges and breaking rules," Meredith announced. "So, Danielle, rewriting the rules of entrepreneurship?" Danielle met her gaze, calm and centered. "Not rewriting, just writing the ones we were never allowed to." The crowd murmured. The game had begun. The first few minutes passed in relative calm. Meredith asked about Danielle's humble beginnings, selling jewelry out of a duffel bag during college, navigating investor meetings as the only Black woman in the room, and building Roots and Rise from her tiny apartment with no capital and no connections. But then, Meredith shifted. "Let's talk about your mentorship program," she said, eyes narrowing. "You call it Elevate Her. It's exclusively for young Black women. Why not everyone? Isn't that a little exclusionary?" Danielle didn't blink. "It's not exclusionary, it's intentional. If a neighborhood has no streetlights, you don't light the whole city. You start where it's dark." A pause, a few claps. Meredith's smile thinned. "But doesn't focusing so much on race divide us? Shouldn't we be focusing on unity, not differences?" Danielle leaned forward slightly. "Unity is a bridge, but you can't build one without acknowledging the river in between." The room stirred. Meredith tilted her head, searching for her next line of attack. Danielle was ready. Meredith's expression sharpened. "Don't you think these targeted programs make people dependent on help instead of learning to stand on their own?" Danielle didn't even flinch. "Let me ask you something, Meredith," she replied smoothly. "When banks give out loans to help people start businesses, is that dependency or is it investment?" Meredith opened her mouth, but Danielle continued. "My program gives these women tools. It doesn't walk the path for them. It clears some of the debris we've ignored for decades. That's not weakness, that's equity." A loud burst of applause erupted. Even the cameraman paused to glance over his shoulder, stunned by the clarity of the response. Danielle's voice grew steadier. emboldened by the crowd. Dependency isn't the problem. Lack of access is. And when we lift people up, we don't take from others. We strengthen the entire system. For the first time, Meredith blinked, uncertain. The game was shifting. Meredith crossed her legs tighter, her tone growing sharper. Some viewers say it's not fair, that your program leaves others out. How do you justify that? Danielle's jaw tightened slightly, but she smiled. Fair? She echoed. When a firefighter puts out a burning house, do we accuse them of being unfair to the ones that aren't on fire? The audience gasped. Then they exploded. Applause, whistles, cheers. Danielle waited for silence before continuing. My program focuses where the fire has been burning the longest. We're not excluding others. We're protecting the neighborhood. Meredith leaned back, her poise cracking. Danielle had shifted the conversation from defense to offense. And the internet? It hadn't even seen it yet. Meredith Cole leaned forward again, attempting to regain control of the conversation. Let me just play devil's advocate one more time, she said, voice saccharine. Isn't focusing this much on race ironic? Some would say programs like yours are just another form of segregation. The studio went silent. A sharp inhale passed through the audience like a wave. Danielle took a beat, not to stall, but to let the weight of the question expose itself. What's ironic, she said, voice calm but loaded with intent, is how people twist equity into something it's not. Segregation was about locking people out. What I'm doing is opening doors that were nailed shut generations ago. A low rumble of applause broke out. She continued, we don't ignore a broken system and call that fairness. We acknowledge the gaps and work to fill them. That's not exclusion. That's correction. Meredith's mouth tightened. Danielle could see the discomfort, the narrowing eyes, the tightening grip on her cue cards. The crowd was no longer unsure. They were with Danielle, and the cameras were rolling. Meredith searched for another foothold, any verbal ledge to cling to. Okay, fine. But when you single out one group, aren't you just creating the same kind of division people are trying to end? Danielle tilted her head slightly. So let me ask you something, Meredith, she said. You know the phrase, pull yourself up by the bootstraps? Do you ever wonder who made those boots? And who decided which boots were worth investing in? The room froze for a moment, stunned by the question's precision. Danielle continued, voice unshaken. We talk about self-made success, but forget that some people start with no shoes, just splinters. And when someone dares to hand out boots, people say it's favoritism. It's not, it's justice. A ripple of applause swelled, then built into a wave. Danielle's eyes didn't leave Meredith. She had no intention of letting this be dismissed as charity or convenience. It's not about giving advantage. It's about correcting disadvantage. Meredith said nothing. Her silence was louder than words. The producers behind the cameras were whispering now. The host's carefully crafted outline was off script, and the audience wasn't responding as usual. Meredith saw it too. Her smile faltered. Just for a second. Danielle sat unmoved. Years of building her company from nothing, of walking into rooms where no one expected her to lead. This wasn't pressure. This was familiar. I know this conversation makes some people uncomfortable, Danielle said, turning slightly toward the camera. But discomfort is where change begins. A woman in the front row nodded slowly. Someone near the back murmured, Amen. When you hear someone talk about equity, and your first instinct is to call it divisive, Danielle continued, ask yourself, what are you afraid it might change? Meredith tried to interject, but aren't you? Danielle lifted her hand gently, not with disrespect, but with authority. Let's not pretend these conversations are about fairness. They're about comfort. Whose comfort are we protecting? And whose discomfort have we been ignoring for decades? Now the audience stood. The applause didn't stop. Even the boom mic operator wiped a tear from her eye. Danielle had the room, and the nation was about to follow. As the segment went to commercial, Meredith quickly exited stage left. Her team huddled near the curtain, hushed and visibly rattled. Danielle stayed seated, still upright, still composed. Her phone buzzed on the dressing room table. Then again, then again. By the time she reached for it, notifications had piled up. Texts, calls, mentions. Her assistant sent one message. You're viral, already. The clip of Danielle's firefighter analogy had been uploaded mid-show. TikTok duets were popping up. Twitter threads were calling it a masterclass in poise and purpose. One tweet read, "Danielle Rivers didn't come to talk. She came to teach." Danielle leaned back in her chair, blinking against the fluorescent lights. She wasn't surprised. It wasn't about shock value. It was about truth. And truth had a way of echoing long after the cameras cut off. 2 days later, Danielle stepped off the plane in Atlanta, exhausted but fueled. At baggage claim, she saw them. Dozens of young women from the Elevate Her initiative, holding handmade signs, phones out, eyes shining with pride. One of them rushed forward. "Ms. Rivers," she cried, almost breathless, "you made us feel visible." Danielle froze, overcome. Another step forward, only 17, holding a small notebook. "I've been scared to pitch my startup idea, but after watching you, I'm not anymore." Danielle smiled, tears pressing at her lashes. She reached for the girl's hand. "You don't need my permission. You never did. But if my voice helped you find yours, then I did something right." The crowd of girls circled around her, hugging, laughing, crying. It was louder than any applause she got in LA. And far more important, by the next morning, Danielle's speech had gone beyond viral. It had become a movement. Clips of her interview were everywhere. News channels, podcasts, activist reels. Influencers reposted her line about building bridges by acknowledging rivers. Major outlets called it the most important moment on daytime TV this year. But Danielle didn't linger in the spotlight. She spent the morning answering emails from mentees, mothers, teachers, even a retired judge. They weren't just praising her, they were asking to help, to donate, to get involved. Her inbox pinged with one message titled, "Elevate Her in Detroit." Another, "Would you consider bringing your program to the Bronx?" It was overwhelming, but in the best way. Danielle felt the weight of momentum, not as a burden, but as a call. She wasn't just defending a cause anymore. She was leading one. Of course, not everyone cheered. Pundits and conservative commentators called her divisive, too radical, race-obsessed. One viral segment even accused her of preaching victimhood. Danielle watched a few clips, then turned off the screen. She knew this game. She played it quietly for years, being palatable enough not to upset, strong enough not to be dismissed. But now she was done walking that line. Later that evening, she wrote a short post on her social media. "The truth isn't always comfortable, but it's always necessary. I didn't speak to divide. I spoke to include those long excluded." Within an hour, it had over 1 million likes. 3 days later, at the Elevate Her Community Hub in Atlanta, a small showcase was held for new program participants. One of the youngest, 18-year-old Aaliyah Monroe, stood trembling at the front of the room, clutching a worn notebook. Danielle sat quietly in the back row, smiling. "My idea is called Rebloom," Aaliyah began, voice shaking. "It's a line of recycled skincare made from urban garden botanicals. I didn't think it mattered. But then I saw Ms. Rivers on TV, and now I believe maybe this could work." Danielle stood and approached her slowly. "Do you believe in it now?" Aaliyah nodded, teary-eyed. "Yes." Danielle placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then you're already a founder. Let's grow it together." That moment would go on to be captured in a photo. A still frame that spread across the internet almost as fast as the interview itself. Days after the showcase, Danielle received a call she didn't expect. "Miss Rivers," the voice said, "this is Representative Valerie Lopez. I saw your interview, and I think we need your voice on the national stage. Would you consider testifying before Congress on economic equity?" Danielle paused, stunned. "Me?" "Yes, you," the Congresswoman replied. "They need to hear from someone who actually walks the walk." Danielle swallowed hard. This wasn't just about one talk show anymore. It was about shaping public policy, ensuring her message went beyond hashtags and applause and into action. She looked at her calendar. Then she looked out the window at the mural painted by girls in her mentorship program. "I'll be there," she said. Inside the congressional chamber, Danielle stood taller than she ever had before. Surrounded by cameras and politicians, she began, "I was invited here because I spoke truth on a talk show. But I'm not here to talk. I'm here to challenge this room to do more than listen." She shared stories from her initiative, statistics on funding disparities, and the reality behind bootstrap myths. But most of all, she spoke of possibility. I don't run a charity, she said. I run a launch pad. I don't believe in giving people excuses. I believe in giving them a shot. When she finished, there was no applause, just silence. A silence heavy with realization. One congressman whispered, "That's the most honest testimony we've had this session." Danielle stepped away from the podium, knowing this fight had just begun. But now it wasn't hers alone. It belonged to a movement. After her congressional testimony, Danielle stepped into a quiet hallway behind the chamber. Her heels echoed softly against the marble. She let out a slow breath, realizing she hadn't exhaled properly since she began speaking. Her assistant handed her a phone, flooded with messages, press requests, praise. But one message stood out. It was a video from Aaliyah. In it, the young woman stood proudly in front of a newly painted sign. "Rebloom, now open." "Ms. Rivers," she said in the clip, "your voice helped me find mine. I just wanted you to be the first to know. I did it." Danielle watched it twice. Then she wiped a tear from her cheek and whispered, "That's why we fight." That night, Danielle returned home to a small welcome dinner with her team and family. The air was warm, full of laughter and quiet awe. Her mother, once skeptical of her crazy ideas, leaned over the table and held Danielle's hand. "You didn't just speak truth to power," she said, voice thick with emotion. "You reminded us that power starts with truth." Danielle blinked back tears. She had been pushing forward for so long, she forgot what it felt like to look back. She realized something vital that night. This wasn't just a moment, it was a flashpoint, and she wasn't just leading a program anymore. She was leading a legacy. A few days later, Danielle received a letter. It was handwritten, folded into a faded envelope, from a woman named Gloria, an 82-year-old retired teacher in Birmingham, Alabama. "I saw you on television," it began. "I remember when girls like you weren't allowed to speak. Now you speak for all of us. I never thought I'd live long enough to see it." Danielle held the letter close to her chest. History wasn't just something behind her anymore. It was in her voice, and in the voices she was helping rise. Weeks later, Danielle returned to the Elevate Her Center to find something new. The mentees had created a wall covered in handwritten quotes, all from her. "You can't build a bridge without naming the river. It's not about dependency, it's about access. Don't ask who gets a pair of boots, ask who had to walk barefoot first." Above it all was a painted phrase in bold red letters. "Your voice is not up for debate." Danielle stood there, hand covering her mouth, overwhelmed. This wasn't about going viral anymore. This was a blueprint. Danielle stood once again in front of a microphone, not on TV, not in Congress, but in a community gymnasium packed with young women. She smiled and took a breath. "The world won't always hand you fairness," she said. "Sometimes you'll have to fight for it. Speak for it. Be it." The crowd nodded in silent agreement. And when that moment comes, when someone tries to shrink your worth to make others feel comfortable, I want you to remember this. Your story, your voice, and your power are not up for negotiation. Applause thundered around her, but more importantly, heads rose, eyes lit up, and hearts awakened. The legacy had begun.